Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Erev Shabbos, and still Rosh Chodesh, entering the new month of Tammuz. So good Shabbos and good Chodesh. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? So excited for Shabbos. I mean, thank God for Shabbos, especially in incredibly busy periods like this. I would not stop. I mean, I getting very few hours of sleep, getting ready for the release of the movie on July 18th. But thank God, come Friday evening, full stop. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for Shabbos. What a gift. Yehud in South Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Guy in Ohio, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Gordo in Scotland, Joe in the Inland Empire, Nancy in North Carolina, Belle in Texas, Tom in PA, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Chaim in Florida, Franco in Trieste, Italy, Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City. By the way, if you have a group that you would like to bring, and we'd love it if you did, bring a group to see Guns N' Moses on opening weekend, we can connect you with our group engagement coordinator, who will just facilitate that experience. Just go to gunsandmosesmovie.com, reserve group tickets, fill out that questionnaire, and then somebody will contact you and help you bring a group. It's a kosher movie. It's good for the Jews. It's good for people of faith. And it's an edge-of-your-seat thriller. Have I mentioned that Nina and I wrote and I directed Guns N' Moses? Everything about that we're doing is directed at the movie right now. But let's keep our class moving. We have business to do, and this tractate, Avoda Zara, how awesome, right? Just beautiful Agadic teachings, spiritual teachings, mystical teachings, difficult to understand teachings, but colorful and emotional. We are on page 5, Daf Hey, here in Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Picking it up about a quarter of the way, maybe a little less, down on page 5a, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 1 of Avoda Zara. And now that we've brought up how God judges, and then we started by saying that we shouldn't do business with idolaters close to their holiday, because it's like putting a stumbling block before the blind. They might have something to celebrate, and then they would do a little extra worship of their idol made of metal, stone, wood, whatever, commit idolatry, and we would have somehow instigated them to do that. Then we started talking about the difference between how the nations worship and how the Jews worship, how God will judge people at the end of time or at the end of their lives. And we're somewhat extended, not really a digression, but talking about how God judges, distinguishing the nation of Israel from the other nations, and then related matters. So here, the Gemara further discusses the sin of the golden calf, which we brought up yesterday, and said the nation was at such a lofty spiritual level. How could the children of Israel, who had just experienced the revelation at Mount Sinai, go so far astray as to worship the golden calf? One explanation is we didn't worship the golden calf. We were afraid that Moses was dead, wasn't coming back. We didn't have some kind of intermediary between us and the awesome power of God, and the people were afraid. And in their fear, they made this terrible decision. Another answer that was suggested yesterday is that God, who ultimately is the author of the story, included this event, or allowed this event to happen, to teach us that no matter how large a mistake we make in this world, there's always room and opportunity to make an atonement. For an individual, we could look to King David, who was at the loftiest spiritual levels of almost anyone in history, and yet sinned in the incident with Bathsheba. And for a community, there we had the children of Israel at Mount Sinai, at the loftiest spiritual level that a nation has ever achieved, and yet they committed this grave sin, and yet God did not destroy them. There was some opportunity to make atonement, and so there is a possibility for atonement for anybody in any situation. Doesn't mean you won't be accountable, but there's always a path back to God. Okay, the Gemara further discusses the sin of the golden calf. Reish Lakish says, "Come and let us be grateful to our ancestors who sinned with the golden calf, as had they not sinned, we would not have come into the world." Now, this is a different explanation for why this event occurred, right? So these are, again, it's like the sages are speculating. There's no dispositive answer. There's no final answer here, but this is a different way to analyze the problem. How could this event have occurred? Now, what does this mean? If not for the sin of the golden calf, we would not have been born. What is he saying? Let's keep reading. Reish Lakish explains, as it is stated about the Jewish people after the revelation at Sinai. Now, this is Psalm 82, verse 6. "I said, you are godlike beings, and all of you sons of the Most High," which indicates that they, the children of Israel at Mount Sinai, had become like angels and would not have propagated offspring. Right? Angels are not physical beings who have marital relations, get pregnant, and have babies. And so what he's saying is that the nation had reached such a lofty spiritual state in this world that they were like angels. It was like their souls were going to leave their bodies and just en masse go up to heaven. Well, if they had done that, then there would be no Jewish people on earth. Then God states, after you ruined your deeds, right? In other words, after the sin of the golden calf, "Yet you shall die like a man and fall like one of the princes." Now, it's interesting to use these two verses from Psalm 82 to indicate that it was really talking about Mount Sinai, the revelation followed by the sin of the golden calf at Mount Sinai. You might not get that from just reading Psalm 82. Right? Psalm 82 is a psalm of Asaph. God stands in the divine assembly. Among divine beings, he delivers judgment. How long will you judge unjustly, showing favor to the wicked? This is addressing the judges who judge in the name of God, right? Allegedly according to Torah. But if judges who are given this tremendous authority and responsibility then allow themselves to be corrupted in any way, It's a massive sin, a massive sin. That seems to be what the psalm is talking about. Selah, do justice to the weak and the orphaned, vindicate the poor and destitute, rescue the weak and needy, save them from the hand of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness while all the earth's foundations shudder. This would be judges who have become corrupted. I once thought, you are divine beings. All of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like mere men. You will fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your possession. Right? So it doesn't sound like it's, on the surface, immediately understandable as addressing the nation, or talking about the nation at Mount Sinai. But that's what Reish Lakish is saying, either that we can apply the same concept to, they were so lofty, they were like angels, and in a sense, judges who are judging in the name of God with righteousness, have a task that is kind of, what is an angel? An angel is a messenger. That's what the word means in Hebrew. And so judges who are judging in the name of God properly are acting like messengers of God. If they corrupt that mission, then they're fallen and fallen low indeed. Okay. But Reish Lakish is applying these verses to say we were at such a lofty state, maybe it just wasn't tenable. It wasn't human. To be at that state was so lofty that only angels can operate at that level. Humans necessarily fall, says Reish Lakish, and thank God, because, God assigned us to be humans, and in the human and real world to do the best we can to be righteous and follow the law and perform the commandments. The Gemara asks, is this to say that if they had not sinned with the golden calf, they would not have sired children? But isn't it written that Noah and his children were instructed, Genesis 9:7, and you, Peru Uravu, be fruitful and multiply? So the Gemara answers, this instruction was issued only until the revelation at Sinai. But the Jewish people would have become like angels there had they not sinned. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't it also written about the Jewish people who were at the revelation at Sinai, not in the later book of Psalms, but in the Torah itself, in Devarim 5:27, go say to them, return to your tents, which means that they were instructed to resume marital relations, because they stopped having marital relations for 3 days before the revelation, so that they would be in a state of purity when they received the revelation at Sinai. So then after it ended, go back to your tents. It means you as husbands and wives can resume living like husbands and wives. And the Gemara answers that verse is referring to the enjoyment of conjugal rights, not to actual procreation. The Gemara further asks, but isn't it written that it might be good for them and with their children forever, Deuteronomy 5:25, which indicates that they would continue to bear children? Where are you bringing up this idea that if they hadn't sinned with the golden calf, they would have become angelic beings who no longer, live in this world and sire children in this world? That seems to contradict these other verses. So the Gemara answers that verse is referring to those children who stood with them at Mount Sinai, not to future generations. So the Gemara raises a further difficulty, but doesn't Reish Lakish say, what is the meaning of that which is written in Genesis 5:1? This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, did Adam the first man have a book? Rather, the verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, showed Adam the first man every generation and its expositors, every generation and its sages, and every generation and its leaders. Right? And saying that God showed the first man, Adam, who was a prophet as well as the first man, and God showed him what the future looked like, right? Who his descendants would be. Adam, who was not, who didn't have parents, wasn't raised by a mother and father, right? He was created from the dust. Everything about his experience was unique, but he had this very close relationship with God. He did participate in the original sin that led to the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, but he had this close relationship with God, and God said, well, let me show you what the future holds for your family. We are all descendants of Adam. We're also all descendants of Noah, who was a descendant of Adam, but then since everyone else died in the flood, that's why we're also understood to be descendants of Noah. Where am I? So he showed him what it would look like. And when Adam, right, looking into the future that God was showing him, when Adam arrived at the generation of Rabbi Akiva, he rejoiced in his Torah and was saddened by his death, as Rabbi Akiva was tortured and murdered, right, by the Romans. They made a martyr of him. And Adam said, "How weighty also are your thoughts to me, O God? How great is the sum of them?" Psalm 139:17. Like Adam seeing the future, there's going to be a lot of glorious moments and achievements, right, in the history of humanity, all the descendants of Adam, but there's also tragedies and terrible, terrible moments of suffering. And so if he's seeing all of that, he's like, okay, seeing the highs and the lows, so to speak. So it is evident from here that the Jews were destined to bear future generations from the beginning of time. So how can you say that if they had not sinned with the golden calf, that would have been the end of the Jews as a nation of humans, and they would have become like angelic beings? I guess you could say they were destined to have the sin of the golden calf. And similarly, Rabbi Yosef says the Messiah, son of David, right, will not come until all the souls of the body have been finished, i.e. until all the souls that are destined to inhabit physical bodies will do so. As it is stated, Isaiah 57:16, "For I will not contend forever, neither will I always be wroth," right, or wrathful. "For the spirit that enwraps itself is from me," this is God speaking, "and the souls that I have made." In other words, God made this certain number of souls. Many of them, most of them, who knows, have already been born and had human lifetimes. Others might be waiting to have their human lifetime. And until all those souls have had their chance to live as mortals, we're not going to reach the end of history, so to speak. So according to Rabbi Yosef, in order for the Messiah to come in the end of days, it is necessary for all those future generations to be born. So the Gemara answers, do not say that if our ancestors had not sinned, we would not have come into the world, as we still would have been born. Rather, it would have been as though we had not come into the world. We would have been of no importance due to the previous generations that would have still been alive. Right? Meaning that if that generation had not engaged in the sin of the golden calf, they would have become immortal. They would still be alive, and we would be much less significant next to them, because somebody who lives for 3,000 years is going to have so much more wisdom than we do. And the Gemara asks, is this to say that if the Jewish people had not sinned with the golden calf, that they would not have died? But isn't the chapter that addresses widows whose husbands die childless written in the Torah? And the chapter that addresses the inheritance that a deceased father bequeaths to his son is also written in the Torah. The Torah, which was given before the sin of the golden calf, includes provisions for how to deal with when people die. So when Jews die. So if you're saying that but for the sin of the golden calf, Jews wouldn't die, why would the Torah provide for what to do when Jews die? So the Gemara answers, these passages were written conditionally, i.e., if the Jewish people were to sin and not become like angels, then those laws would take effect. The Gemara asks, and are verses written conditionally in this manner? And the Gemara answers, yes. As this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says. What is the meaning of that which is written? And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, established a condition with the acts of creation. And He said, if the Jewish people accept the Torah in the revelation at Mount Sinai, all is well, and the world will continue to exist. But if they do not accept it, I will return you to the primordial state of chaos and disorder, which we've now seen that teaching a few times. The Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa to the new formulation of Reish Lakish's statement, right? That but for the sin of the golden calf, initially we worded it as they would have stopped procreating. Now we're looking at it as they would have stopped dying, but still procreating. Well, where are we? The Gemara objects from a Baraisa to this new formulation. that according to this new formulation, according to which the Jewish people would have become immortal had they not sinned with the golden calf. So the Gemara objects to this, saying, the verse states about the Jewish people after the revelation at Sinai in Deuteronomy 5:25, who would give that they had such a heart as this always, to fear me and to keep all my commandments, that it might be good for them and with their children forever. Deuteronomy 5:25. So the Baraisa states that although they had reached such an elevated state, it was not possible to nullify the power of the angel of death over them, as the decree of death was already issued from the time of creation. Maybe they would have been angel-like, but it doesn't mean that they would have become immortal, because to be human is to be mortal. So rather, the Baraisa explains that the Jewish people accepted the Torah only in order that no nation or tongue would rule over them, as it is stated in the same verse that it might be good for them and with their children forever. And this indicates that had the Jewish people not sinned with the golden calf, they would not have achieved immortality, which contradicts Reish Lakish's statement, but rather they would have acquired an awesome power such that they would not be subject to the authority of any other nation. They would not be persecuted by Jew-hating nations over the millennia, as has been the case. That would not have happened if we had not sinned with the golden calf. But at any rate, we would not have become immortal, as Reish Lakish seems to be saying. So the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish said his statement in accordance with the opinion of that Tana, a rabbi, a sage of the period of the Mishnah, the Baraisas are teachings contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but not quite as authoritative. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosef says the Jewish people accepted the Torah only in order that the angel of death would not rule over them. As it is stated, I said, you are godlike beings, or angel-like, angelic beings, and all of you sons of the Most High, where we started this, Psalm 82, i.e., they had become immortal like angels. But then God states, after you ruined your deeds, yet you shall die like a man and fall like one of the princes. So the Gemara asks, and also according to Rabbi Yosef, isn't it written that it might be good for them and with their children forever, from which it may be inferred that although it will be good for them if they remain in this elevated state, there will still be death? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yosef could have said to you, since there is no death, there is no greater good than this, i.e. the promise of the verse is immortality. We could have become immortal, but for the sin of the golden calf. And the Gemara inquires, and according to the first Tana as well, isn't it written, yet you shall die like a man, which indicates that their mortality was decreed only due to the sin of the golden calf. And the Gemara answers, what is meant by death? What is meant by death in this context? It means poverty. As the Master said, 4 are considered as though they were dead, and these are a pauper, a blind person, a leper, and one who has no children. Right? Now, this is obviously a pretty strong statement, and they don't mean that it would be better to be dead if you were a metzorah, right? Somebody suffering from saras, or somebody who is childless for whatever reason. They're saying that there are aspects of that condition that are like death because it removes you from the community, right? But there are many sages who are incredibly righteous people who didn't have children, right? There were people who become metzorah and then they are purified, cured of that and purified of that. To be impoverished, there were many sages, both ancient and more recent, who were impoverished and yet contributed incredible things to, our inheritance of Torah. But one who is impoverished, seriously impoverished, it's difficult for them, right, to learn Torah the way they would if they weren't, thinking about where am I going to get my next meal, right? So to be very poor makes life so difficult that in certain aspects it's like being dead, and we see that in other places. Also, it can lead to an earlier death, right? Because you're vulnerable in this world. Doesn't mean that you need to be rich, but you gotta have a certain minimum level of resources in this world, or you're vulnerable, right? Like the animals have no need of that, They just do what they do. There is a meal for them. Every animal that exists in this world, unless there's a famine, a drought, things like that. But generally speaking, they were created and they have what they need on their bodies to keep them warm, and there is food in their environment that they can eat. Humans have this additional thing that we're organized into societies where we don't all have a subsistence life where we go out and gather the food that we eat. We contribute to society in certain ways, and then we go into that society and acquire what we need in terms of food, shelter, etc. And we use money to facilitate that exchange between the contribution and acquiring what we need. So if you don't have any of the money that you would need in that situation, you're very vulnerable. And that's why poverty can be likened to death in that sense, metaphorically. Okay, where am I? It's like poverty. A pauper is considered as though dead, as it is written that God said to Moses, "Go, return to Egypt, for all the men that sought your life are dead." And who were these men? Well, they were Dathan and Abiram. But did they really die? They were still alive, as they participated in the rebellion of Korach, which took place years later. So rather, the verse does not mean that they had died, but rather that they had lost their property and become impoverished. And this demonstrates that a pauper is considered as though he were dead. A blind person is considered as though they were dead, as it is written, "He has made me to dwell in dark places, as those that have been long dead," in Lamentations 3:6. A metzorah is considered as though he were dead, as is written that Aaron said to Moses when Miriam was struck with this condition of tsaras, "Let her not, I pray, be as one dead," right? Be like one who is dead. Dead to us, we can't interact with her. She has to go outside the community and be quarantined. And one who has no children is considered as though he were dead, as it is written that Rachel said to Yaakov, "Give me children, or else I am dead," is how she felt about it, because she wanted to, have children to contribute to the family, like her sister was having 6 kids, and she was barren. The sages taught with regard to the verse, "If you walk in my statutes," Leviticus 26:3. And in this context, the word "if" is a term that means nothing other than supplication, right? It's a prayer to God, i.e. God, or prayer by God. God is hoping that the Jewish people will observe the Torah, but he gives them free will and free choice to make their own decision in that. But God is hoping we'll make the right choice. And similarly, it is stated, "Oh, that my people would hearken to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. If they would do this, I would soon subdue their enemies," from Psalm 81. And it states, "Oh, that you would hearken to my commandments, then your peace would be as a river, and your righteousness as the waves of the sea. Your seed also would be as the sand, and the offspring of your body like its grains." I say Isaiah 48. New subject. The Gemara returns to a verse that was cited above. The sages taught with regard to the verse, "Who would give that they had such a heart as this always to fear me and keep all my commandments, that it might be good for them and with their children forever?" Right? In other words, we had reached such a high, lofty state. Everybody was clinging to God. This is when we said, "Na'aseh v'nishma," right? We will do whatever you tell us to do, God, and later we'll understand it. And God was saying, if only you could stay at this level. Right? You're so close to me. You're such a holy people right now. You're motivated and driven only by a desire to fulfill the mission that I've given you. You shall be holy. You shall be a holy people unto me. But God knew, that they could not maintain that state. And we're humans, and we fall. We make mistakes. But God, was saying, if only they could stay at this level. At a later stage, Moses said to the Jewish people, "Ingrates, children of ingrates." When the Holy One, blessed be he, said to the Jewish people, "Who would give that they would have such a heart as this always?" They should have said, "You should give us a heart to fear you," right? When God said, if only you could have a heart like this all the time, the people should have said, "Please, God, strengthen our hearts so that we could stay at this lofty spiritual level." Now, the Gemara explains that Moses calls the Jewish people ingrates, right? Ungrateful. As it is written that the Jewish people spoke disparagingly of the manna. What were we eating for 40 years in the wilderness? Manna, right? In Hebrew, mun. What was the mun? The mun was this layer of a white frost-like substance that would appear on the ground in the mornings, protected by a layer of dew beneath and dew above, so that it was fresh. It wasn't coming into contact with the ground. It had no bugs in it. And whatever I've read elsewhere, whatever your favorite food is, that's what it tasted like, right? It was delicious to everybody according to their own taste. It just appeared on the ground every morning, right? So this is a period where no one needed money at all because God was sustaining them constantly, every day. But humans being humans, they're like, oh, I gotta eat this mun again. We had mun yesterday, we had mun last week, we had mun last month, we had mun last year. We had something different. Right? They complain, as it is written, that the Jewish people spoke disparagingly of the mun, quote, and our soul loathes this light bread. Now we're on page 5b from Numbers 21:5. Despite the fact that it was the highest quality food, precision made to give the human body exactly what it needs, right? When people were eating the mun, no indigestion, no eczema, no food allergies. Everybody was eating exactly what their body needed to feel good. Moses further called them children of ingrates, as it is written that after sinning and eating from the tree of knowledge, Adam said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. Adam complained that the woman had been given to him in order to cause him to sin, whereas, in fact, she had been given to him to serve as a mate, right? Like it was the ultimate gift. Adam was alone, and now, he had his complement, right? Man and woman, the two halves of this perfect union that God created, and until she was there, man was incomplete, just totally adrift and lost, so to speak, and seeking his other half. And now Adam blames God for sending the woman to him because she caused him to sin. Ungrateful is this teaching, says according to this teaching. And yet, even Moses, our teacher, who said this to the Jewish people, did not allude to the Jewish people until after 40 years that they should have stated this request. God strengthened us so that we could remain at a loftier level. As it is stated, and I have led you 40 years in the wilderness, Deuteronomy 29:4, which shows that Moses was speaking 40 years after the revelation at Sinai. Why didn't Moses tell them that when they were at Mount Sinai? And at that point it is written, but the Lord has not given you a heart to know, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, until this day. Deuteronomy 29:3. And Rabbah said, conclude from here that a person does not understand the opinion of his teacher until 40 years. As Moses said this to the Jewish people only after 40 years of learning Torah. They learned a lot directly from God, directly from the mouth of Moses, directly from the elders and sages and students who learned from Moses that then went out and taught the people. Whatever Torah we've learned, it's been passed down and transmitted, teacher to student, father to son, parent to child, generation to generation for 3,000 years. So you think about a game of telephone, we've lost a lot. Right? But these people heard it all directly from, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, Moses, who heard it directly from God. And even so, they couldn't understand important part of what he was saying, perhaps the most important part, until 40 years had passed. And it makes sense. How many things did we learn when we were kids? Well, right over our head. And then later, with some hard-won experience in life, we're like, oh, that's what my teacher meant. Oh, that's what my parent meant. Oh. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Bana, what is the meaning of that which is written? Happy are you that sow, S-O-W, that sow beside all waters, that send forth freely the feet of the ox and the donkey, Isaiah 32:20. What does this mean? Happy are you, Israel, when they, i.e. the Jewish people, engage in Torah study and in acts of kindness. Then their evil inclination is given over to them, meaning they have power over their evil inclination. They don't, get seduced by their evil inclination. And they are not given over to their evil inclination. As it is stated, happy are you that sow beside all waters. Waters often means Torah, right? So that when you're engaged in Torah study, you can conquer your evil inclination. And the term sowing, like sowing seeds, is referring to nothing other than performing charitable deeds. As it is stated, sow to yourselves according to charitableness, reap according to mercy, from Hosea 10:12. And the term waters is referring to nothing other than Torah. As it is stated, ho, everyone that thirsts, come for water. Very famous verse, Isaiah 55:1. With regard to the continuation of the verse, that send forth freely the feet of the ox and the donkey, one of the sages of the school of Eliyahu taught a person should always make himself subjugated to matters of Torah, like an ox to a yoke, and like a donkey to a burden, and this will protect you and shield you and save you from your evil inclination. After concluding its long introduction, the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. We're back to the Mishnah, that we don't do business with idolaters during the 3 days before their idolatrous holidays. The Mishnah taught that on the 3 days before the festivals of the idolaters, it is prohibited to engage with them in business or to lend them items. And the Gemara asks, and is it the practice of the idolater to buy an animal so far in advance of his festival that it is required of Jews to refrain from selling an animal to the idolaters for all of these days before their festivals? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah in Tractate Chulin, on 4 occasions during the year, one who sells an animal to another is required to inform him, I sold the mother of this animal today, for the buyer to slaughter it, because you can't slaughter a mother and its young on the same day. So if you're selling the calf to somebody, you have to say, hey, I slaughtered the mother of this calf today. So if you want to slaughter that calf, you have to wait a day. Or I sold the daughter of this animal today, for the buyer to slaughter it. This notification is necessary so that this buyer will not slaughter the animal on the same day that its mother or its young is slaughtered, thereby violating the prohibition, you shall not kill it and its young both in one day, Leviticus 22:28. And the Mishnah continues, and these 4 occasions are the eve of the last day of the festival of Sukkot, the eve of the first day of the festival of Pesach, Passover, and the eve of Shavuos, and the eve of Rosh Hashanah. And according to the statement of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, the eve of Yom Kippur in the Galilee is included in this list as well. The Mishnah indicates that one prepares for a festival for only 1 day prior to the event. So why does the Mishnah here prohibit sales 3 days prior to the Gentile festivals, the idolatrous festivals? And the Gemara answers there in the Mishnah in Chulin, where the animal is purchased for consumption, it is sufficient to prepare 1 day before the festival. Here, in the case of the Mishnah, of our Mishnah, where the animal is purchased for sacrifice so that the idolater can worship his false deity, the idolater requires 3 days to ensure that the animal has no blemish. Right? You can eat a blemished animal, but you can't sacrifice a blemished animal. So the Gemara asks, and for the purpose of sacrifice, is it sufficient to prepare merely 3 days in advance? But didn't we learn in a Baraisa, one begins to ask about the laws of Passover 30 days before Passover. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one begins to inquire only 2 weeks before Passover. But according to both opinions, far more than 3 days are needed in order to begin preparing for the sacrifice of an offering. One can assume in this conversation that the same applies to the idolaters. So perhaps we shouldn't do business with them for 2 weeks prior to their idolatrous festival. And the Gemara answers, we Jews, for whom blemishes that disqualify the animal are common, there are many types of blemishes that will disqualify an animal from being offered as a sacrifice, right? As even a small blemish on the cornea of the eye would disqualify it. So we require 30 days to prepare for the sacrificial offerings of the festivals. By contrast, with regard to them, the idolaters, they hold that only the blemish that They hold that the only blemish that disqualifies the animal is if it is lacking an entire limb. Therefore, 3 days are sufficient for them to prepare for the sacrifice. As Rabbi Lazar says, from where is it derived with regard to an animal that it is lacking a limb, that it is prohibited for descendants of Noah, i.e. all humans, to sacrifice it as an offering? As it is written, and of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort you shall bring into the ark to keep them alive with you. Genesis 6:19. In this verse, the Torah states, bring an animal whose extremities are alive, as some of those animals were to be used later as offerings. Right? When they went into the ark, for all the animals that were in the world, there were 2 of each, right? A male and a female, so that when they came off the ark, they could reproduce and begin that species again. But for the kosher animals that were going to be used for eating and bringing sacrifices, there were 7 pairs, so that they could be brought as sacrifices or eaten. And the Gemara asks, isn't that verse required to teach that an animal with a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months, that's called a treifa, is not fit to be sacrificed as an offering? And the Gemara answers that disqualification of a treifa is derived from the phrase to keep seed alive, as a treifa cannot propagate. And the Gemara asks, well, this works out well according to the one who says that a treifa cannot give birth. According to this opinion, the disqualification of a missing limb is derived from the phrase of every living thing, while the disqualification of a treifa is learned from the phrase to keep seed alive. Now at the top of page 6a, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. But according to the one who says that a treifa can give birth, then what can be said? According to this opinion, just signing in, so I'll be able to get the questions from Nina. Really open the YouTube app on your phone so that I can sign in. Oh, this is ridiculous. Yes, it's me. Sorry, that never happens. There we go. Okay. But according to the one who says, really? This is ridiculous. Come on, come on. Questions or comments loading, I hope. There it is. Okay, but according to the one who says that a treifa can give birth, what can be said? According to this opinion, a treifa cannot be excluded by the phrase to keep seed alive. And the Gemara answers that verse states with regard to the animals that were brought by Noah into the ark, you shall bring them into the ark to keep them alive with you. And the term with you indicates that the verse is stated with regard to animals that are similar to you, but not a treifa. So the Gemara asks, but perhaps Noah himself was a treifa. If so, one cannot exclude a treifa from the comparison of animals to Noah. So the Gemara answers, it is written about Noah that he was complete, and therefore not a treifa, not somebody who had some kind of a wound inside or an illness that would cause him to die within a year. And the Gemara challenges, but perhaps that verse means that his ways were complete, but is not referring to Noah's physical attributes. And the Gemara explains, it is already written about him that he was righteous, which means that his actions were perfect. Consequently, when the verse says that he was also complete, it must be referring to his body. The Gemara is not satisfied and challenges by saying, but perhaps the verse means that Noah was complete in his manner and he was righteous in his good deeds. Accordingly, the verse would not exclude the possibility that Noah himself was a treifa. And the Gemara explains it cannot enter your mind that Noah himself was a treifa, as if it enters your mind that Noah was a treifa, would the merciful one have said to him, bring in treifos like you to the ark, but do not bring in whole and perfect animals? And the Gemara asks, and now that it has been established that one derives the disqualification of a treifa from the term with you, why do I need the phrase to keep seed alive? And the Gemara answers, if one could learn only from the phrase with you, I would say that Noah brought the animals to the ark only for the purpose of company. And therefore, even if an animal that is elderly and even one who is castrated can come into the ark, provided that it is not a treifa, it would be okay. But now that we know that the animals were brought in to procreate, therefore the merciful one writes to keep seed alive, teaching that only animals that could bear offspring were permitted to be brought into the ark for obvious reasons. Okay, that's what we've got today. We're near the top of page 6a, and with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow after Shabbos ends. It is the latest Shabbos that there is. I think last week I got on about 10 p.m., aiming for that, maybe even a little earlier if I can manage it, because it's so tough for the East Coast people. Okay, a few questions. Bill, and of course, not only is it the case that none of these explanations are dispositive, but moreover, many of them are not mutually exclusive. God is capable of many things, but to say the least, he is capable of multitasking. To say the least, God is capable of multitasking. Very good. Joseph says, I've heard the Psalm 82 is also about the Nephilim, right? The giants that walked the earth in the early days of humankind. Perhaps there is an interpretation that includes both views. Why not? I mean, absolutely, it is unclear exactly what it refers to. So very good. Now we've heard three possibilities. Judges, who corrupt justice. The Jewish people at Mount Sinai who sinned with the golden calf, and perhaps the giants, right, who were the offspring of angels and human women, and that walked about the earth for some time and were the heroes of old. They're mentioned, right, in the book of Genesis, and they could have done glorious things, but they behaved very badly, and I guess most of them were gone, certainly by the flood. Although some say that Goliath was one of these, right? So that some of them somehow survived to that late period. Bill, I don't know that I can really get behind Reish Lakish's argument here, because I don't care for the included implication that humans are by definition going to sin. There are versions of that idea that I can get behind, that we are so prone to sin that it is nearly inevitable, but not totally, which seems to be what Lakish is saying. I'm not sure he was saying that. I mean, there were two ideas, right? One is that if we'd not sinned with the golden calf, we would not have procreated, because we would have been angel-like. Another, we would not have died. But I think that sort of teaching, what does he really mean, right? Well, if it hadn't been like this in history, we would be totally different. Okay, but it was like that in history. Reish Lakish isn't saying this thing's just idle speculation, by the water cooler. He's teaching us the kind of Torah that we're meant to learn from in a way that affects our behavior, inspires us. So I love the teaching that even if we feel we've fallen so low, we've committed so many sins, Reish Lakish was a master of atonement. As a young man, he learned some Torah. Then, it was a promising sage. We learned that elsewhere. Then he went out completely and it was living as a bandit. And then Rabbi Yochanan, saw his potential, brought him back under the wings of the Shekhinah, and he atoned so completely that he became one of our great sages and the only worthy learning partner for the great Rabbi Yochanan. So when Reish Lakish tells us that, the fact that we are prone to be human and to fall and to make mistakes, but that we can rise up from that. And we didn't learn it on today's daf, but we learned it elsewhere, right? That if, first of all, atonement is always possible. If you atone from your sins because you fear God and you fear, the retribution that will come to you either in this world or in the next world, you can make an atonement and your sins are going to be pushed aside, and you may have enough merits, in your rewards for the good things that you've done, that it will outweigh those sins. But if you atone because you love God, right, in gratitude to God for the constant kindnesses and gifts that he bestows upon us, including, our loved ones, our health, all the stuff that we so easily overlook, like the children of Israel, were ungrateful in the aspect of the manna, right? If we would remember to be grateful and love God the way we're commanded to, and so atone for our misdeeds out of love for God, then our sins aren't just pushed aside. They are transformed into merits. Incredible. incredible teaching that our sins will be transformed into merits when we complete our atonement, and it's an atonement motivated by love. Right? It's amazing teaching. And so I think that Reish Lakish is sort of headed in that direction, saying, well, look, if they hadn't sinned and been brought so low and sort of dug a hole for us that we're always trying to dig ourselves out of, we would have lost a certain opportunity, to rise to levels that wouldn't have been available to us if we're making a very sincere atonement, not only for our people in past misdeeds, but for ourselves, right? In the ways that we've been affected by that, and in the ways that we have fallen, all the mistakes that we have made. Sharon, very interesting that Jews in Europe were forbidden from Torah studies on Christian holidays like Easter and Christmas, as their lives were at risk. Could there be a tangential connection to this Mishnah about not engaging in business with them because it might lead them to celebrate, and commit more idolatry than they would have otherwise? That's very interesting. Christmas, being a winter solstice holiday that comes, 3 days after the winter solstice, we're not going to comment on that holiday, as it is related to Christianity and the teachings of Christianity, which I am not qualified remotely to teach or speculate about. But there was a holiday at that time that we are going to learn about in this tractate that pre-existed Christianity by a lot, right? There was always a winter solstice holiday. We sort of touched on it yesterday because someone asked a question, I think, who was coming to us after having learned the daf maybe on the schedule. We're a few days behind. But when we get to Calenda and Saturna, I think it's called, these Roman holidays, it's going to be fascinating. Roman and probably based on Greek holidays, but there was always an idolatrous holiday at the winter solstice, because you can imagine for ancient humans, agrarian-based systems, the fact that the days are getting shorter and colder in a continuous line, and then eventually the sun stops sinking lower each night or each dusk, or etc., and then starts rising again, and the earth starts warming again and headed towards summer again. That's something that ancient peoples always celebrated. And if you think about Adam Rishon, the first man, experiencing the first onset of winter and not knowing that this ever-diminishing sun and daylight would, renew and start growing again, he was panicked, right? It was an absolute panic for him. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos in LA, something like 10 p.m., hopefully a little earlier, Pacific time. May we enter Shabbos hearing only good news. May we leave Shabbos hearing only good news. May we only hear good news on Shabbos. All the best.